That's quite all right. The committee meets today to discuss the state of our country's critical mineral supply chains and what can be done to make them stronger and more resilient. It's no exaggeration to say that America's resilience on Chinese critical minerals represents one of our greatest strategic vulnerabilities. Twice last year, Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping threatened to cut off exports of Chinese rare earths. This would have brought American defense manufacturing to its knees and deeply damaged the U.S. economy. Our advanced weapon systems and key parts of our civilian economy rely on critical minerals, materials that are largely imported from China. Specifically, America imports over 70% of our rare earths from China. These elements are the backbone of permanent magnets and perhaps the most important component for phones, cars, and military systems. More than 60% of American antimony comes from China. Antimony is a necessary ingredient for many explosives, electronics, and batteries. I could go on with other examples, but the simple point is this. The scale of China's critical minerals domination is wholly unprecedented. The situation is untenable for America's national security and economic prosperity. The good news is that the U.S. government is forming a plan which will simultaneously reestablish critical minerals as a global free market and significantly increase American mining and production of these key elements. This effort will take more than a decade. It will face setbacks. It cannot be achieved without leaning on our allies and partners, and it will be expensive, but it is a necessary risk. The Pentagon has been and will be at the center of these efforts, given the centrality of critical minerals to our weapons manufacturing. And that brings us to the committee's interest in this matter. Joining us today are two Pentagon officials, Mr. Mike Catanazzi, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Industrial-Based Policy, and sir, I hope I pronounced your name exactly correct.
You did, absolutely.
Catanazzi, okay. Assistant Secretary of Defense, and then Mr. Jeff Frankston, Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Industrial Base Resilience. Both Mr. Catanazzi and Mr. Frankston and the teams they lead have done important work. They performed a deep analysis of both our military's requirements for critical minerals and the state of industrial production, from mining to refining across the globe. That data-driven approach is leading to new investments by the Industrial Base Fund, the Defense Production Act, and the National Defense Stockpile. It's also driving interagency investments from the Development Finance Corporation, the Department of Commerce, and others. It is imperative that our investment strategy remain closely tied to the areas of greatest military need. Rebuilding America's critical mineral supply chains will require additional investments. Last year's Defense Reconciliation Bill included $5 billion for the Industrial Base Fund, $2 billion for the National Defense Stockpile, and a $100 billion loan limit for the Office of Strategic Capital. Those appropriations have already paid dividends. Last year, the Pentagon signed deals with MP Materials and a consortium of Vulcan, ReElement, and Corning for magnet production. Another investment went to Element USA, which will be making progress on obtaining gallium and scandium from a recycling process. We have brought Australia, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia into deals where mining or refining opportunities do not exist here in the United States. The good news is that we do not need to outspend Communist China on this effort. We can leverage our private capital markets, one of our few remaining comparative advantages against Beijing. Many of our allies and partners have incredible mining and refining opportunities. Dozens of countries are poised to ditch the predatory debt trap diplomacy Beijing has foisted upon them in this area. As to private capital markets, I appreciate the Pentagon's use of innovative financial tools to power these deals. In some cases, Congress has spoken clearly on these tools. The committee created the Office of Strategic Capital Loan Program 3 years ago, during the Biden administration. Since then, we have remained intimately involved in amending its legislation. In other cases, such as the use of equity-based investments, little law currently exists. I believe these equity-based investments make good strategic sense in many cases, particularly where no free market exists and where we've seen aggressive Chinese economic warfare. However, opinions range wildly between and within our two political parties. While not public, Ranking Member Reid and I had a long series of discussions with our House counterparts last year about legislation regarding equity investments. I anticipate that conversation will continue in earnest this year. This legislation is both important and urgent because rebuilding America's critical mineral supply chains will take more than a decade. We must give the free markets confidence that America's approach will stand the test of time and succeed in unshackling the world from Beijing's market domination. To do that, we need effective government tools built on a solid foundation of law and bipartisan support. This year, the committee has much work to do in this endeavor. We will discuss equity as an investment tool. We will examine the need for continued multi-billion-dollar investments in this area. We will consider further improvements to the National Defense Stockpile Authorities, and we will expect improvements in communication from Pentagon leadership on our investment strategy. Congress understands the need to execute quickly, but that cannot excuse a lack of communication and partnership. Communication and partnership between the Congress and the administration. I hope today's hearing is the beginning of a historic year in which this committee and the Trump administration work together to rebuild America's supply chain. So thank you to our witnesses for being here today. It should be very interesting, and I turn to my friend and colleague, Ranking Member Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to our witnesses. Thank you for appearing today on a matter that is of great importance to this country and indeed the free world. Over the past several decades, the United States has steadily lost its leadership in critical minerals. From World War II through the 1980s, we led the way in critical mineral production and lithium-ion battery manufacturing. But over time, American industry shifted that production overseas, primarily to Asia, in pursuit of cost savings. The consequences of those decisions are now very apparent. Today, China dominates the processing and refining of the materials that make our most advanced weapon systems function, from the rare earth elements in radar and missile guidance systems to the battery chemistry powering the next generation of drones. The Department of Defense accounts for less than 1% of total U.S. critical mineral demand, but an enormous range of critical military platforms depend on it. Congress has worked to address this issue. Through successive National Defense Authorization Acts, we have increased resources for the National Defense Stockpile, encouraged end-of-life recycling of weapon systems, qualified domestic vendors, and restricted procurement from unreliable foreign entities. And those efforts matter. But what has been missing is a coherent, overarching national strategy that aligns the Department of Defense, Commerce, Energy, and Interior, as well as our allies around a common framework. Without that, we risk patching holes rather than building something durable. I'd like to know how our witnesses regard such a strategy and what efforts are currently underway. I do have one major concern regarding the Defense Department's current strategy, and that is the use of equity investments under the Defense Production Act. In July of last year, the department announced that it acquired a 15% equity stake in MP Materials, a rare earth mining company in California, at a cost of $400 million, making the U.S. military one of that company's largest shareholders. Since then, the department has made equity investments in a number of critical mineral companies. I have questions about the legal basis, financial terms, and strategic rationale for these transactions. The legal basis in particular appears questionable. The department has argued that the Defense Production Act provides the authority for these investments. However, while the Defense Production Act does authorize the purchase of industrial resources for government use, it does not mention equity investments at all. The fact that the Trump administration's Office of Management and Budget has subsequently requested a legislative proposal to explicitly authorize equity investment suggests that the administration itself recognizes the current authority is uncertain, and that should give us pause. Further, the department committed to purchasing magnets from MP Materials at $110 per kilogram for 10 years, beginning in 2028. The committee has not received an explanation of how that price was determined or why that duration was appropriate. We have also heard from other domestic producers that this arrangement affects their ability to compete, which raises broader questions about market effects and unintended consequences of government intervention. Finally, I understand that a small team was dispatched to evaluate the MP Materials transaction, including outside consultants, but this committee has had very limited visibility into that review. I have concerns about potential conflicts of interest, given the financial interest that certain stakeholders appear to have in this transaction. The committee's interest is straightforward. We want to understand whether this transaction and the equity investment model and use of price floors more broadly represents the most effective and legally sound way to rebuild domestic critical minerals capacity. And I look forward to a substantive discussion with our witness today, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ranking Member. And now, Secretary Catanazzi, we'll begin with you.
Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the Department of War's strategy and actions to secure a resilient supply chain for critical minerals. This issue is fundamental to our national security and the technological superiority of our military. I am joined here today by Mr. Jeff Frankston, our Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of War for Industrial Base Resilience. A career member of the Senior Executive Service, Jeff is my technical expert on supply chain resilience, the Defense Production Act, and the Industrial Base Fund. We are thankful for the talents and selfless patriotic service of Jeff and our entire civilian workforce. Thank you, Jeff. As the Assistant Secretary of War for Industrial Base Policy, I am responsible for guiding the department's efforts to cultivate and sustain industries that meet America's needs and the growing demand for U.S. capabilities from our allies and partners around the world. The strength of the United States Armed Forces is built upon a foundation of advanced technology. Our fifth-generation aircraft, precision-guided munitions, satellite constellations, and next-generation naval vessels all depend on a reliable supply of rare earth elements and minerals including gallium, antimony, germanium, and dozens of others. For decades, we have outsourced and offshored mining and processing, creating a strategic vulnerability of the highest order. Today, our primary strategic competitor, China, controls the global supply chain for numerous critical minerals. On heavy rare earths alone, China controls 95% of global output, with the United States importing almost 100% of what we use, 90% of that coming from China. This control provides Beijing with the ability to weaponize these supply chains, threatening to disrupt our defense industrial base and compromise military readiness in a crisis. This is not a theoretical risk. It is a clear and present danger to our national security. The Department of War considers the reclamation of our critical mineral independence a strategic imperative and calls it out as such in the Acquisition Transformation Strategy published this past November. Congress also clearly recognizes the need, as the 2026 National Defense Authorization Act classified critical minerals as strategic assets vital for national defense and economic security. Since the beginning of the administration, the Office of Industrial Base Policy has been at the very center of these initiatives. The team is working night and day to rebuild American critical mineral supply chains. In this time, we have invested $975 million in minerals through Title III of the Defense Production Act and the Industrial Base Fund. The Department of War has developed a comprehensive, multi-year strategy to address this vulnerability head-on. Our approach is founded on 4 key pillars designed to create a secure, resilient, and sustainable supply chain ecosystem. Pillar 1 is our commitment to reshore and onshore the production of critical minerals. We continue to map defense industry to dependence on China and are focused on removing those dependencies from our supply chains. Congress providing $5 billion and the One Big Beautiful Bill Act specifically for critical minerals is a significant investment and one we very much appreciate. We are also leveraging authorities granted by Congress, particularly under Title III of the DPA and the Industrial Base Fund, to catalyze investment in domestic exploration, mining, and processing. We partner with our colleagues in the Office of Strategic Capital to offer loans, loan guarantees, and debt financing options. This expands our collaboration and cooperation with the interagency and international partners on bringing mineral supply chains to friendly shores. Through these tools, we are sending a clear and sustained demand signal to the industrial base. We are working across the entire value chain, from mine to front line, to build our resilience. For example, the MP Materials deal helped secure a domestic source of rare earth elements, and the department continues to take action in concert with our interagency partners to decisively secure the U.S. rare earth supply chain. The Korea Zinc effort will build a smelter in the U.S. to produce 13 different non-ferrous metals, including germanium, gallium, and antimony, metals used in space power generation, advanced optics and munitions, among other uses. Additionally, $184 million in prior investments will provide high-performance magnets, germanium crystal, and other critical mineral derivatives and capabilities. Next, while we prioritize domestic production, we recognize that no single nation can achieve complete self-sufficiency. Therefore, our second pillar focuses on building robust, transparent, and reliable supply chains with our closest allies and partners. This friend-sharing approach diversifies our sourcing away from high-risk geopolitical areas and complements our Pillar 1 efforts to build new end-to-end sources of supply, foster secure and reliable transport and logistics networks, and transform the global market into one that is secure, diversified, and resilient. We are actively working with partners to jointly invest in and secure supply from responsible mining and processing operations across the globe. For our third pillar, the department is aggressively investing in research and development to mitigate demand for the most heavily contested minerals. Our scientists at DARPA and other service research labs are pioneering the development of next-generation materials and novel manufacturing techniques that can reduce or eliminate the need for certain rare earths and other critical inputs. Simultaneously, we are funding the development of advanced recycling technologies. For example, we invested $29.9 million in Element USA to recover gallium and scandium from waste residue left over from alumina refining. By creating a robust circular economy, we can reclaim valuable materials from our own waste streams, from spent batteries to decommissioned electronics, turning a liability into a strategic asset and a secure domestic source of supply. As our final pillar, we are modernizing the national defense stockpile to ensure it serves as an effective buffer against near-term supply chain shocks. We are conducting a rigorous, data-driven analysis of our strategic requirements for a 21st century contested environment and are taking action to acquire materials that face the most acute supply chain risks. Congress stepped up to help us with this effort, providing $2 billion in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. This modernized stockpile will provide the insurance we need as we execute our long-term strategy of rebuilding the domestic industrial base. The committee asked for an update on recent and planned deals, and I am pleased to report significant progress. I will highlight 2 recent examples. We have finalized a landmark agreement with a Canadian partner to secure a long-term supply of gallium derived from new non-traditional mining techniques, reducing reliance on Chinese sources for this critical semiconductor material. The department also recently entered into a joint R&D agreement with Australia to co-fund the development of substitutes for dysprosium and terbium and high-performance magnets. In closing, I want to emphasize that establishing secure and resilient critical mineral supply chains is a generational challenge, but it is a challenge we must and will meet. The era of complacency is over. The Department of War, in concert with industry, our allies and partners, and with the vital support of this committee, is committed to executing this strategy with urgency and resolve. Securing these supply chains is not merely an economic issue, it is a foundational element of our national defense. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Frankston, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In addition to everything that Mr. Kadnazi just mentioned, one of the things that I want to emphasize is the full and unified interagency cooperation on this effort. This is a subject area that is not new, but has been turbocharged in the collaboration, cooperation as we work together across each of the interagency partners to identify the gaps, to have common targets, common understanding of our both domestic challenges, and then in particular from our perspective, Department of War needs. And we work together on a daily, if not hourly basis across the interagency with our international partners, with industry to identify the gaps and challenges here. Our office oversees the policy for the National Defense Stockpile, as Honorable Kadnazi mentioned. This is a key aspect that is a direct opportunity for our country to build a resilient capability. The stockpile is one of the major statutory pieces that we have taken the funding to implement a direct challenge or to address a direct challenge on how we're addressing critical minerals. I look forward to answering the rest of the committee's questions.
Thank you very much. Well, Secretary Kadnazi, you say the era of complacency is over. Mr. Frankston, you say that this issue is not new. I've been on this committee since 2008. Maybe I should be ashamed of myself. How is it that China, if they had persisted in their threat to cut off exports, could have brought us to our knees? How do we get to this point, Mr. Secretary?
Senator, we're engaged in a long-term competition with our primary strategic competitor in China. They've engaged in malign adversarial efforts to manipulate markets to secure control, change supply, and to undermine our own efforts to maintain a domestic market. That's been coupled with natural economic incentives to outsource to the lowest supplier, a lowest cost provider, which China often is as a result of their lack of compliance with environmental and standard kind of work laws that we would have in the West, particularly in the States. And therefore, they've demonstrated a willingness to go ahead and create and invest these capabilities, undercutting our ability to sustain this. We've taken action in part at times, we've invested, but it's been inadequate to the scale of the threat posed by China in this time. And therefore, I think the opportunity we have before us today is to go ahead and take a demonstrated, committed effort, well-resourced and aligned across both parties with the support of this committee and the Congress to go ahead and fundamentally reshape those markets. We believe our investments and efforts at this front are
well, I understand. We have no question and no choice but to go forward as quickly as we can. And I'm not pointing the finger at anybody in particular. And I think I acknowledged that I'm a bit nonplussed about this. But we've been hearing for several administrations that China is our pacing threat. And it just seems to me that collectively we should have been tackling this a long time ago.
Senator, I can't speak to the previous efforts, but it's clear that the position we're in right now is inadequate to the needs of the nation with regards to both our domestic economic performance and national security.
Okay, now you're going to be asked about this new approach. Of course, we deal with industry a lot, but the idea of equity is something that there are going to be questions about on both sides of the dais. Why is it the way to go in your judgment on this issue of critical minerals?
Senator, the issue of, or the opportunity that equity provides us is that it's a catalyst for private investment and a more aggressive way of reconciling what has been a failed market-based approach to address this national security need. We have invested small amounts of money. We've provided grants. We've tried to incentivize through tax incentives and things like that.
How far back did we start trying that?
How far back? Sorry, Senator?
Because you say we've tried other approaches.
I believe we tried consistently for the past 10 or 15 years, if you sort of read the press. I'm sure there are more significant investments that I'm not aware of, but it's pretty clear that the things that have been done have been inadequate to the scale and have not resulted in the outcomes that we've wanted. And I think that's the measure is on an outcome basis, as of last year and currently, our dependence on China for rare earths remains significantly high. And so the acquisitions in the past have not met our needs. We think that
But if conflict had broken out in the last last year, between the United States and China, which of course we certainly hope we can avoid by being strong enough, it would have brought us to our knees. Well, could you help us understand, do you agree with my statement there?
Senator, it's very clear that the willingness of China to turn off the spigot on rare earths last year represented a significant threat to national security and would have been debilitating to both domestic industry and to the defense industrial base.
Specifically?
I think there are many systems which are highly dependent upon rare earths and other elements which would have been struggled to get access to those outside of the National Defense Stockpile, which thankfully we have a significant amount stored away. That probably would have carried us through for a period of time. Presumably, we would have engaged in aggressive action to unlock mining both domestically and with partners to mitigate those gaps. We would have fundamentally shifted the production curve in a way that would have prevented that for the long haul. But in the short term, there definitely would have been a crunch that would have impacted our ability to produce the weapon systems we need.
Thank you very much. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me commend you in holding this hearing because, as you've indicated, we have not paid the kind of attention in the Congress that we should have, nor have the administration. So thank you. Mr. Khatanazi, we've heard from various companies in the minerals market that an equity stake and a 10-year price floor for MP minerals, where the government is literally picking winners and losers, puts other companies at a competitive disadvantage. How can other domestic companies remain competitive when DOD invests so heavily in one company and provides that company a competitive advantage like a guaranteed price floor?
Senator, at the time, the MP Materials deal we felt was necessary to meet the needs of the moment, that is to immediately stimulate rare earths investment and demand. The company, MP, has been invested in by the government in the past. For the past 15 years, we've at various times attempted to move the needle on domestic rare earths production using that particular firm and location. At the time, we felt the need to go ahead and move forward with a more aggressive model that would lock in the equity stake and create the offtake agreements and the price floors. The price floors are determined by a set of open market analyses reflecting our best understanding of what an open Western market would look like, as opposed to the manipulated Chinese price floor. As we've seen since that time, prices domestically have actually increased to the point where they're roughly, in some reports, around 110 per kilogram, which is where the price floor is at. So we think we've successfully created the mechanism to generate more transparent and market-based pricing mechanisms. That's to everyone's benefits. We've also crowded in additional investment. We've seen additional companies committed to spending in this space. And that all is a beginning point for us to create a more liquid and robust domestic market for rare earths.
I've also been informed that MP material mines rely on, in their production process, on a heavy rare earth element or elements from an unknown third-party source. Can you tell us who that third party is and what country it is located in?
Senator, we're in the process of working through right now to go ahead and identify additional sources for rare earths to improve their processing capabilities. There's an optimal mix of light and heavy rare earths, and I think I defer to Jeff on this, that we were working to go ahead and strike supply with. So we've struck additional deals with a Brazilian company, and we're in discussions with a Saudi Arabian company to provide access to additional raw materials.
Who is providing the material to MP materials now? What country? What third-party country? and
There's
company?
Serra Verde is the company in Brazil we've struck an agreement with. We're in the process of negotiating that. And then Modern in Saudi Arabia is the other company.
Thank you. As I requested yesterday on a phone call with the chairman, could you provide us the term sheets for the deal? We'd like to look in detail at what has been transpired. And I think you indicated that it is wending its way up through the process. But if you could give it a little boost, I'd appreciate that.
Ranking Member Reed, absolutely. We've submitted our request for it to be approved. It is in review now.
Now, China is going to try to triangulate, circulate, get around this. With the price level, could they simply reduce their prices and cause DOD to commit significant dollars to MP materials? Or in general, how are they going to frustrate you?
Ranking Member Reed, I think part of our approach is to create a more solid Western demand signal. So that's where something like the preferential trade zone, which is in a market zone, willingly voluntary commitment by our allies and partners to all operate in a way where we agree on price floors that essentially are set in a collaborative manner by countries that are worried about Chinese malign manipulation of markets, and that we collectively can agree on establishing price floors that will not allow them to manipulate it, because we'll voluntarily agree to pay initially a higher price. But as demand decreases on their end and increases on ours, the prices should level into what we hope is a more transparent and reasonable global market pricing that will work to our benefits in the long haul.
Finally, the MP materials deal relies on future appropriations, which calls into the question of, does it comply with the Anti-Deficiency Act? Have you analyzed that and determined it won't?
Senator Reed, I've not personally conducted analysis in this. We've relied upon the Office of General Counsel and our legislative affairs teams to help us in moving forward. From an industrial-based policy standpoint, we've submitted requests for funds to go ahead and pay the quarterly payments that we expect are necessary to meet our offtake agreements. Going forward, we've planned that through the FIDIP, and we expect that we'll continue to, barring any changes in policy.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
Cadenzi.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you calling for this hearing. Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony. Look, this issue is infuriating for me because so much of the challenges we face as a country are self-inflicted. And I work in a bipartisan way on this committee a lot. But I will tell you, part of the answer is, how did we become so reliant on China and other adversaries of ours in critical minerals? One reason is that there's a huge difference in this town between Republicans and Democrats on who wants to develop our mines and processing. That is a fact. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, they need to look at this issue straight in the eye, because so many of them are afraid of the far left environmental groups. They have prioritized shutting down mining and not developing critical minerals in America, and especially in my state. Let me provide a few examples. My state is estimated to have 56 out of the 60 critical minerals our country needs. Let me repeat that. In Alaska, the U.S. Geological Survey has said 56 out of the 60 critical minerals that we need to compete for our industrial base, especially in the military, reside in my state. But a core element of the far left, once they get into power, is to shut down Alaska. That's a fact. This is the Joe Biden 70 executive orders, what we call the last frontier lockup. When he got into power, he issued 70 executive orders. Let me list them right here. Okay? By the way, 10 of them were on his inauguration day. So this was a plan. 70, many of which dealt with shutting down critical minerals. Crazy. Crazy. Okay? And on this committee, my colleagues probably remember the Ambler Mining District, the road to the Ambler Mining District, one of the biggest critical mineral deposits in America. We debated it on this committee, and to my colleagues' credits, and I want to thank them, on this committee, we won that amendment vote of mine to have access to the Ambler Mining District, which Joe Biden shut down, one of these. I think the vote was 21-6. Great victory in the NDAA 2 years ago. What happened? Chuck Schumer made it a priority, so did Hakeem Jeffries and the Biden administration, to strip that provision out in the committee. So this is not rocket science. The far left on the other side of the aisle has kept my state from producing what the country needs. It's not rocket science, and it still happens right now. So let me ask, and I appreciate the focus of this committee, but this frustrates the heck out of me because it's not just, of course, killing thousands of jobs in Alaska, which nobody seems to care about. It's empowering our adversaries. So I appreciate the Trump administration's focus. By the way, the president, again reversing Biden, who reversed the president in his first term, did issue an order on the Ambler Mining District. So we're going to start working on that. But let me ask you two gentlemen on another topic that we're working on in the EPW committee, major permitting reform, NEPA reform, to make it more efficient, timely, and certain to develop mines. Isn't that also important? And by the way, it's another issue that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have blocked for decades. I've worked on that issue for more than 10 years. Is that important, Mr. Secretary? And how important would it be to get major NEPA permitting reform done?
Senator Sullivan, absolutely. Environmental restrictions have been a major point of contention for mining, development, production. At every turn, we've looked at opportunities to develop resources on the industrial base, for example, on military land, which offers some alternatives for how we could implement environmental risk constraints. With a Defense Production Act, does provide some remediation efforts for application of environmental standards. We'd be keen to work with this committee and the Congress on opportunities where appropriate to go ahead and work.
Well, I think it's going to be really important, even though it's not directly in this committee, for you guys to weigh in on the importance of the permitting reform. This matters to energy. It matters to everybody. We're doing a lot, and it's bipartisan so far. I'm going to submit for the record some questions on some of the investments the Department of War has made in Alaskan mining. I appreciate that very much. Let me ask you, Mr. Secretary, one final quick question. I appreciated the 8A meeting. That's a very important issue for my constituents in terms of lethality, flexibility, war fighting, keeping the IP that the Pentagon gets to keep when they do those kind of programs. Limiting 8A opportunities, in my view, would be a gift to the primes, the big primes. Can you give me an update on how that's going? I appreciate the meeting, but that's a really important one for me.
Thank you, Senator. 8A issues and the audit associated with that continue to be a major priority for the Office of Small Business Programs within industrial-based policy. We continue to focus on issues associated with fraud within the program primarily, and we're really excited about finding new opportunities to bring new entrants into the space, particularly through the 8A programs in the future.
Would you agree that a lot of them, particularly as we talked about, my constituents bring a focus on lethality, flexibility, and make the Pentagon more lethal, as I presented to you guys?
Agree, Senator Sullivan. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Sullivan, we probably need to put copies of those two posters in the record at this point. So
Gladly, Mr. Chairman.
unless there's objection, that is so ordered. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't object to putting those in the record, but I do object, Senator Sullivan, to your blanket attack on Democrats as being the reason that critical minerals aren't
I said
being
one of
developed.
the reasons. One of the reasons. It is.
Well-
There's no doubt in my mind.
Senator Shaheen.
I live it every day.
Senator Shaheen is recognized. We'll take a second round.
Well, I think a better way to address this issue would be for us to work together and to not name call and try and educate people on why this is so critical, as you have been trying to do. So I would hope that you
I
wouldn't
would
just
welcome the
decide
chance
that
to.
because I have a D after my name, I'm not going to be supportive of critical minerals.
I'm not saying everybody, and you've been great on this, Senator Shaheen.
All right, thank you. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. I want to go back to the equity investment question that Senator Reid and Senator Wicker both raised, because it's not clear to me what the criteria is that you're looking at in making an equity investment. So can you outline what that is and then explain whether you're focusing more on extraction or processing in terms of those investments?
Thank you, Senator. There's no criteria in such that we're looking for equity investments as a deliberate approach. I think the way I would view it and describe it, ma'am, is that what we want to do is achieve the outcomes of improved investment, performance, and production within the mining space particularly. And therefore, we're talking to companies about what would make them more successful over the long haul. In some cases, we've taken equity associated with direct DOW investment through the IBAS and DPA programs.
I'm not being clear, I think. So what determines whether you think a particular company is a good choice for that equity investment, and how do you determine that criteria, and then how do you decide whether you've been successful or not?
Thank you, Senator. So thank you for clarifying that. So we conduct a robust diligence process. So we actually have we have an internal effort through our global investment and economic security team to do foci and intelligence analysis and counterintelligence analysis. We couple that with external market analysis to understand the production rates of this particular mine or whatever it might be associated with their place in the market. We then add in additional experts from both internal to the government, within Jeff's team, or within others, our partners within OSC and other agencies, to determine whether or not we think this mine can meet the targets that we have. That is generally an increase in production from one number to another. And then, ma'am, sorry.
Did you have something else you wanted to add?
No, I just want to say then we couple that all together, we make a reasonable business case analysis, we hope is, that determines what the right mix of direct investment and or debt may be to meet those requirements for the country.
And then can you answer the extraction versus processing question?
We're not overly indexed on, our goal is to go ahead for every one of the critical minerals we've identified, which is 20 plus critical minerals. We're creating what we call a value chain, which goes from the mine all the way through production, refining, to recycling. The goal is to go ahead and provide an adequate number of investments at each of those places, whether directly through the DOW, through our partner agencies, or through private capital, to make sure that we're investing appropriately across each of those elements.
And can you tell me, my understanding is that the biggest issue here is not China's control of the actual critical minerals themselves, it's the processing that they do that nobody else is doing. So how are we focusing on the processing in ways that allow us to build that supply that we're going to need?
I'll let Mr. Frankson weigh in on that one.
Thank you, sir. Senator, for each critical mineral that we look at, as Honorable Catanazzi pointed out, we build a supply chain map across the board from the raw material to the finished product and look at each stage with a domestic focus, specifically on Department of War requirements, but then building that into the broader domestic requirement piece. One of the key aspects is where does China or other competitors control over that particular critical mineral? And so it's a different story for each one, but each one we target is how do we make this investment along the entire supply chain so that we're not making an isolated investment in one stage of the process, and that it has a feeding and receiving mode in terms of the rest of the supply chain so that we build an integrated domestic and joint partner capability.
And so are we investing in any processing capability?
Yes, ma'am.
Senator, absolutely. The goal is to go ahead and work across the entire supply value chain, and that requires us having raw material inputs, processing, and the ability to go ahead and move that further into the supply chain.
And can you tell us what companies are doing that processing and the difference between what they're doing versus what China's doing? Because again, my understanding is one of the challenges is that China is able to do the work without any requirements that affect their workforce.
Senator, yesterday we provided your offices, the whole committee, a copy of an antimony value chain, which breaks that down in detail as an example of the type of analysis we're doing. It gets into the details of companies and production rates. We'll be happy to go ahead and provide additional insight into those value chains, which gets into that, and we'll provide specific comments on the companies that are performing that we're looking to invest in those sectors going forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator.
Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our witnesses. I wish Senator Sullivan was still here. Just one comment about his concluding remarks that Democrats have been blocking permitting reform. for decades. I think Democrats have been working hand in hand with Republicans on permitting reform issues. My understanding from Democrats on the relevant committees were that those issues were closing, and there was a real possibility of finding a path forward that was bipartisan. But President Trump's decision to wage war on clean energy, especially a concerted effort to wage war against offshore wind projects, which have been repeatedly rebuffed in courts, but that has not stopped the president from attacking offshore wind, has caused the permitting reform efforts to grind to a halt. It seems to me in this area of critical minerals or energy self-sufficiency, if we're going to be all of the above, we should be all of the above and not just all of the below oil, gas, and coal. My state has been affected dramatically by President Trump's actions. We want permitting reform, but we don't want permitting reform that takes clean American domestic energy off the table. To my witnesses, thank you so much for being here today and for your work and for your testimony. I was in Australia last week for a visit connected to AUKUS and appreciate some of the testimony earlier about AUKUS Pillar 1. Australia produces about half of the world's lithium, but historically has relied on China for refining. What specific steps is the DoD taking to ensure Australia refining and separation capacity scales fast enough to reduce reliance on Chinese processing? And this question builds upon a positive meeting that the President and the Australian Prime Minister had in October, where they announced a bilateral partnership to escalate Australian critical mineral production and refining.
Thank you, Senator. We're excited to be partnered with our Australian colleagues. We've invested in Alcoa in a partnership with the Japanese as well in Australia recently. Lithium is not something that we're terribly focused on within the DOW. It is not on our critical list. There's too many problems, and so we've decided that we need to make some choices. That is something we believe we have adequate supply from global sources, from domestic production, from our partners and allies, that for the moment, the DOW itself does not require as much focus on it. So we've prioritized other minerals, yttrium, germanium, gallium.
Let me build on that, appreciating the comment you made about lithium, but the general issue of refining capacity is an important one. It's not just where are the critical minerals, how can we extract them and get them to market. China has sort of locked up a lot of the world's refining capacity. So in developing a critical mineral strategy that we can rely on, with a supply chain that we can rely on, what is the DoD doing to focus on the refining issue as a component of those minerals that you're concerned with?
Absolutely, Senator. It's a major priority for us. We're working across, again, the value chain to make sure that for all of the critical elements that the DOW has identified, that we are investing adequately in each element to include mining, production, refining, and recycling in an adequate way. And I'll turn it over to Jeff for any specific comments on refining.
Yes, thank you, sir. Senator, Australia is a fantastic partner and ally on multiple fronts, but especially when it comes to minerals, just given what their country is blessed with and what is in the ground. From a processing standpoint, we look for opportunities with all partners and allies to build a domestic capability through the Defense Production Act. Australia is actually considered a domestic source. And so we are working on a number of different fronts, as Honorable Kadanazi mentioned, on Alcoa of Australia. That is a trilateral investment with Australia and Japan, but we have other open opportunities. Just 2 weeks ago, we held a defense industrial-based consortium call for submissions of papers and proposals from industry across the world. That includes Australia, and it's at all stages of production. And we welcome any participation, any cooperation, any collaboration that directly aligns with the President's agreement signed with Australia last year.
One last question back to lithium. A few weeks ago, the DoD announced that 25 vendors had been invited to compete in phase 1 of a drone dominance program. Lithium-ion batteries are a critical enabling technology for drones, but China does control much of the upstream supply chain for processing battery materials. What are the requirements for the drone dominance vendors to source battery or other materials from the U.S. or allied suppliers?
Thank you, Senator. The batteries issue is a critical one, not just for drones, but for the entire supply chain for the Department of War. So minerals that go into those batteries are available, we think, for lithium more or less. There's challenges associated with some of the alternatives. So there are alternative chemistries for batteries. We have a large team that works within industrial-based policy on batteries issues. We convened a whole-of-government effort 3 weeks ago, to go ahead and look at batteries opportunities and the threat from China's control of markets on batteries. So we're working with our colleagues to go ahead and identify alternative sources and chemistries, and then to work with the teams that are driving drone adoption to identify the right mix of controls on access to battery raw materials and technologies going forward.
Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kadenzai, did I get that right?
Yes, Senator.
And Mr. Frankston, thank you both for being here. I want to ask you about how we supply semiconductors to the defense industrial base. As you both know, semiconductors go in a lot of stuff used by our military, and semiconductor technology advances rapidly. Moore's law says processing power doubles every 18 months. The DoD's procurement programs do not operate at that same kind of speed. And the end result is some of our most advanced weapon systems are relying on chips that are old, sometimes outdated, sometimes decades behind the state-of-the-art technology. And historically, DoD has relied on a small number of trusted foundries, which are fabs that not only serve, they serve government customers. So would you both agree that this approach has not succeeded at protecting DoD's access to the best chips in the world for its most important programs?
Senator, we've perennially underinvested in the technology and the engineering necessary to migrate our systems to go ahead and leverage the most current state-of-the-art chips. And as a result, we do have a legacy infrastructure which produces a large number of the chips that meet our needs, which are essentially based upon older technology. So concur entirely.
So it sounds like an area where we could put some focus on and try to fix.
Absolutely, Senator. It is a challenge.
So, and we've worked on this committee for years to try to solve this issue by placing production lines that meet DoD's security requirements in commercial fab facilities so DoD can get those leading chips without compromising any security. And these programs, there's a couple of them. One is the Secure Enclave. The other is the Microelectronics Commons. And these programs, they've been stood up, and they're fully funded, and they're getting ready to produce some chips. There's just one problem here. Major DoD programs are still choosing to have the old, outdated foundries produce the chips, not the new ones. So would you both agree that there are meaningful strategic advantages to sourcing leading-edge chips for our major programs?
Senator, I concur in the need for us to go ahead and continuously improve the security of our chip infrastructure and the chips themselves, and that the tools that are in place under Secure Enclave, et cetera, provide us new alternatives to deliver upon that.
But why haven't we used those alternatives?
So there's price considerations and engineering considerations with migrating from the current chip infrastructure to new chips and new security models. And I think inherently it's a cost issue that programs have been incentivized to sort of, go short shrift on this and not pay the bill, and that we need to incentivize them to pivot to actually investing in the infrastructure changes necessary to take full advantage of this for the future.
Can you give an example of like how much more does a chip coming out of the Secure Enclave cost for like a weapon system,
Senator,
like percentage-wise?
Senator, I'm not sure I can comment thoughtfully on the cost of chip. We can get back to you on that. I think there's a bigger issue of the certification cost for these new systems. When you change the chips, you often have to requalify systems and their performance. It becomes a cost driver for test, for engineering. There's a whole bunch of ancillary pieces that go into it. And the bill gets pretty large, millions of dollars into the tens of millions of dollars to go ahead and make these changes, unfortunately.
How about for new weapon systems, something that's brand new?
The challenge we've had is that often the firms that deliver these weapon systems are incentivized for ease of access and approval to leverage infrastructure that's already approved and tools that are already approved. So therefore, to go ahead and launch a new weapons platform with a brand new security or IT infrastructure, whatever that might be, or microelectronics infrastructure, is often cost prohibitive and not incentivized by the programs themselves.
But we funded the Secure Enclave and the Microelectronics Commons. Are they not approved?
Senator, I believe that they are, and that we're in the process of migrating to those requirements over the next 5 years or so. However, I do think there's going to be a bit of a tail and a lag, and particularly a bill associated with how we make that migration work.
What could we do to make that migration happen more quickly?
Senator, I think we'd be keen to work with you and the committee on authorities and changes to policy that would help us drive those changes and an understanding of the costs associated with that to make it work going forward.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my 6 seconds.
Quite generous of you. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my questions, I would like to note that we all acknowledge, both the Democrats and the Republicans, acknowledge the importance of critical minerals and our over-reliance on China. At the same time, though, there are environmental concerns with mining these resources, and I just want to put on the record my opposition to this regime's attempt to reverse a 20-year ban on mining near Minnesota's boundary waters. And while access to critical minerals supplies domestically are important, we can't just toss out the kinds of environmental concerns that have to do with contamination of local lakes and rivers, as is the case in the Minnesota situation. So environmental requirements are important. We don't just toss those things out because we want to, because you can argue that there's failed marketplace efforts to justify equity shares in, I suppose, any number of private entities, and it's really hard for us to determine whether that is an accurate depiction of the reasons for it or not. But this is very unusual for the government to acquire equity shares, and there are issues relating to competition or the lack thereof when we get an equity share in a private entity. So I just want to raise my concerns. And there's also an issue of whether or not the Defense Production Act even gives the authority under the act for the U.S. to achieve equity shares. And there's a question is if that authority is deemed not existent, I don't know what that does to the equity shares, $400 million. Does that mean that that deal has to be unwound? It reminds me very much of the Supreme Court's decision on the unconstitutionality of the tariffs and the billions of dollars that are, there are going to be arguments about returning all of that. Let me turn to something that I think I think is very positive on this issue of critical minerals, and that has to do with recycling of critical minerals from end-of-life equipment. So I'm glad to see that in your testimony you refer to recycling as one of the ways that we're going to address our need for critical minerals, and especially obtaining critical minerals from spent lithium-ion batteries. So I wanted to ask you, what progress are you making in this area of recycling, and are you preparing any demonstration projects to scale these recycling technologies up?
Thank you, Senator. A great example of our recycling capabilities is through the Defense Logistics Agency, through their germanium recycling program. They have taken night vision optics that have been decommissioned after periods of use and have been able to harvest back the materials so they have a ready supply of ready material for the warfighter, for the defense industrial base as a reserve into our...
So I'm sorry, I am running out of time, but I want to make sure that you are, both of you, are very committed to shoring up the recycling aspects of critical minerals, and that you are spending the kind of money that we need in R&D for this purpose. Are you, one, committed to recycling, and two, do you have, I had a question as to whether or not you have any demonstration projects to show us your progress in this area?
Senator, we're absolutely committed. We recognize that recycling would be a critical source of supply for us for the long haul. And there are multiple demonstration projects underway within the R&E portfolio, research and engineering, portfolio. We'll go ahead and come back to you on the report what those projects are.
And are you making it clear to the private sector that they also can participate in the developing the kind of recycling of critical minerals from spent materials? So that
Absolutely.
they can put their energies and brain power to enabling us to recycle?
Absolutely, Senator. We put out our requirements often to the market and hope that we can bring the best of breed capabilities back for us to leverage in these decisions and these analyses.
Mr. Chairman, can I just ask one short question about a provision we put in last year's NDAA?
Yes, ma'am.
So Section 1412 of the fiscal year 2026 NDAA requires the Defense Logistics Agency to report to SASC and HASC on best practices to expand their strategic material recovery and reuse program by March 1st, 2026. That is right around the corner. Is that report on schedule?
Senator, the Defense Logistics Agency is a separate agency, field agency within acquisition sustainment. I'll bring that request back to Honorable Duffy, who's the Undersecretary for A&S, and we'll find out.
This is an issue, you know. I mean, recycling is a very important part of the testimony you gave, and yet you're not the one that's able to tell us whether this report is going to be on time or not. But I appreciate your conveying it to the appropriate entity in DOD. Thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to do that, Mr. Catanazzi. Senator Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Catanazzi, can you speak to the specific importance of the Department of War's equity investments and how they played a role in supporting the department's critical mineral supply chain security? And in other words, what is uniquely helpful about equity stakes relative to
Senator.
other kinds of support that we would use?
Thank you, Senator. We believe that given the frailty of many of our minerals markets, that equity is a necessary component to go ahead and drive alignment of the companies, make a clear commitment from the government that we're interested and we're committed to not just the market, but the company in question, hence the rigorous diligence that we conduct on that company and its performance, that we can then crowd in private capital, which will allow us to go ahead and expand our operations and leverage less taxpayer money to go ahead and achieve our ends, but also signal a real change in how we plan to operate and the demand signal for that particular component or mineral going forward. It's been vital. It's been very successful so far. It forges a true partnership with the company in question and allows us to plan for the long haul. Again, our goal in this is not equity outcomes for ROI for economic or financial returns. Those funds would return to the taxpayer. Our goal is to improve mineral production and the availability of those minerals to the Department of War and more broadly to the nation.
Has the department ever used an equity investment tool before?
Prior to the current administration, I believe we used tools like warrants during, say, the 2008 financial crisis.
So there is a precedent.
It has happened in the past, different format, but yes.
Yeah. Can you talk about how we might use it in the future?
Senator, we believe that where opportunities exist for the government to supplement our spending with external capital, that equity is a powerful tool for us to incentivize the investment of our partners in industry, private capital markets, and to accelerate the pace at which we're able to go ahead and generate new production capacity. We would anticipate using this as an alternative to other financing mechanisms where we've tended to offer grants to companies to facilitize, for example, where we might want to go ahead and offer an incentive for them to self-facilitize, or alternatively for us to take an equity stake going forward.
Are there additional authorities that you need as we head into NDAA season that might help you provide equity investments in other sectors too?
We recognize that there was a robust discussion last fall with regards to equity language in the 28 or 26 appropriations or an authorization bill that did not reach fulfillment. We're eager to continue those discussions to make sure that we're all in alignment on the appropriate use and controls on the application of equity.
Can you walk us through consequences for the department when the Chinese first expanded their rare earth export controls last October? What did that do to us?
Senator, it was absolutely a crisis. I came in after that, and so I think having discussed with the team, the commitment to national security and the minerals front has been very vigorous since. I didn't discuss minerals at all with the the committee when I was confirmed, or in my committee discussions last fall. But this has become a major topic. We spend a substantial amount of time and the Congress's money to go ahead and work on these minerals issues, and we're really excited about the impact we're having on the space, and we believe over the past 14 months, the administration has already started to bend the needle substantially on availability, and we're looking forward to more impact over the next few years.
And what does it mean to America and to the department specifically to be reliant upon our biggest adversary?
Well, it's unacceptable from a national security standpoint that our primary strategic competitor can go ahead and turn off the spigot on a mineral which we absolutely require for the production of nearly every weapons platform.
Mr. Chairman, that's all I have. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Reid, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just two quick questions, if I may. Secretary Kazanazi, we've talked about equity. This is an issue that's not going to go away. But there are other tools that are available, direct grants, many other tools. So why was equity chosen above these other approaches?
Senator, we believe that at this time to go ahead and incentivize enough private capital, provide a clear signal to the market that the DOW itself is interested in solving these problems, which are outsized relative to our normal focus on it, that equity is a necessary tool for us to make that commitment. We also think it provides a tool to recoup our investment over time. That is, the taxpayer will be repaid through a successful investment if the market works out as we believe it will, which is we invest in a company, we solve our national security problem with access to that particular mineral, that our equity stake will actually pay back the taxpayer for that return. We think that's a great deal for the taxpayer, as it's going to go ahead and meet both of our needs within the department and the country's needs for the future.
Now, let me ask just another question. This is all critical in terms of the legal basis for all of these actions, and can we be assured that we will get promptly the DOD legal opinion on these equity deals that go through all the nuances we've spoken about this morning?
Senator, I believe that the department's OGC has worked on providing those legal justifications to the Congress, and we'll go ahead and submit that request back again.
Thank you very much.
You have any idea how much longer that will take, Mr. Secretary?
Chairman Wicker, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an OGC, but I will go ahead and ask the team there to give us a timeline.
Senator Reid.
No, you're just trying to claim the veil of innocence by claiming you're not a lawyer. Okay, I get it. No, the investments, the equity investments are such that raise issues that I hope we can see analyzed in these legal opinions. For example, what obligation do you have as a shareholder to the company and to the versus what obligation do you have to the United States? That's a key distinction. And I know the present investments are in the form of preferred stock that's convertible into common stock, but there's still that whole notion of this tension between a stockholder and a government agent, and that's something I hope will be captured in these opinions. Have you seen that discussion?
Senator, absolutely understand the concern. We've established these deals to provide for performance outcomes. Our goal is not economic returns. We're not trying to excise long-term ownership of these companies. The goal is not to have a stake forever. The goal is to achieve our outcome, execute some sort of exit strategy as appropriate to the moment, and then continue on with the next set of problems for the DOW. Ideally, we wouldn't be spending much time on minerals. We feel compelled to do so as a result of the situation in the market.
No, well, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary and Mr. Frankston, for your very, very clear and testimony. I appreciate it very much.
Let me ask you this, Secretary Catanazzi. Are we expanding your workforce enough? We had understood that in your team, they were working some of the longest hours in the building. How is that coming along?
In the One Big Beautiful Bill, Chairman Wicker, we received several $million, $20 million, I believe, in funds for workforce expansion, specifically within Jeff's team in industrial-based resilience. We've worked incredibly hard to go ahead and fill those roles and begin the expansion. It's been taking some time for the money to flow in, but I'll turn it over to Jeff.
The money didn't arrive quite as quickly as perhaps
Not
Congress
as much
thought
as
it
I
would.
wanted, Senator, yes.
Right.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just in the last few weeks, we've brought on about 4 or 5 people alone on my team to work across a number of key sectors. So the resourcing provided from this committee, from yourself, from this team has been phenomenal. We are building our capability to grow across all sectors, but in particular focus on critical minerals. We just brought in a 3rd expert to help us, and we're going to be bringing in more to cover in some of these smaller sectors and some of the underlying sub-tier and enabling things like chemicals. For leaching for critical minerals, looking at recycling, looking across all these areas. So we are very much appreciative and looking forward to bringing on more personnel.
Well, I'm glad you're appreciative. Sometimes those ponies going from one side of the river to the other are a little slow getting across the bridge. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when you sign a contract, you expect to get what you paid for at the price and on the date that was spelled out in the contract, but not for DOD. When DOD signs contracts to buy equipment for hundreds of billions of dollars, giant defense contractors often deliver late, years late, and billions of dollars over budget. So recently, the GAO found that in FY 2024, DOD's major weapons programs were 18 months behind schedule and would cost $50 billion more than budgeted just the year before. $50 billion in 1 year. That is not an oops. That is 2 times what the federal government spent on childcare that year. Now, General Dynamics Oiler Ship Program, an extra $1 billion. Raytheon's Air and Missile Defense Radar, another $6 billion. Northrop Grumman's Sentinel program, $36 billion over budget. And all are at least 3 years behind schedule. And now, DOD is ramping up investments in critical minerals. And you got to worry, are we just going to see the same thing again? So, Mr. Catanazzi, you are the principal DOD advisor on industrial base policy. Does it help or hurt our national security when DOD signs a contract for the equipment it needs and it actually gets it years later and for billions of dollars more?
Senator, it's absolutely brutal when that happens. And I think everyone in the department agrees that the performance of the industrial base and our contractors that are delivering weapon systems has been unsatisfactory overall for an extended period of time, hence the aggressive effort we've been making to go ahead and focus on manufacturing and the DIB to make sure that we start to go ahead and get the outcomes which are expected for us to meet the requirements of the warfighter.
Yeah, well, I got to say, unsatisfactory might be the understatement of the day. Look, if you bought something and then the company said, pay us more and we'll give it to you a year later, you'd report them to the authorities. But defense contractors are a year late and over budget, and what happens? They rake in taxpayer dollars and then they shell out billions of dollars to their shareholders and to their executives. So in 2024, Raytheon, General Dynamics, and Northrop Grumman each spent $3 billion on stock buybacks and dividends. Their executives, you'll be happy to know, did just fine too. Raytheon's CEO earned $18 million. General Dynamics CEO made $23 million. And Northrop Grumman's made $24 million. So, Mr. Catanazzi, does it help or hurt our national security when giant contractors spend billions of dollars on stock buybacks and CEO payouts at the same time that they are failing to deliver weapons on time and on budget?
Senator Warren, we agree that companies investing in share buybacks, dividends, and oversized executive compensation relative to their poor performance is a concern. We are not happy with it, hence the EO that came out regarding warfighter outcomes, hence our incredible focus on trying to drive improved outcomes from these companies going forward and making it clear that we think that the misalignment of capital and the unwillingness to invest first in warfighter performance and system performance and delivery rates, readiness, is a more important thing relative to these other financial incentives. We recognize that they're have market expectations to meet. Their first expectation needs to be delivering for the warfighter.
Well, I appreciate this, but we're just really reaching a point where enough is enough. A recent Trump administration executive order announced a plan to prohibit buybacks, dividends, and excessive compensation for companies that fail to deliver to our warfighters. It's a good start, but defense contractors are already bragging to their shareholders that they're not going to change. So obviously, they're not very afraid of you at this point. When asked if Northrop Grumman would continue paying dividends, the CEO said, quote, yes, 100% yes. Raytheon, which the president called out as a problem, said they, quote, remain committed to the dividend. So let me just ask, I'm out of time here, so I can do this for the record, but Mr. Catanazzi, would DOD benefit from changes in the law to give this executive order more teeth and show companies that we're actually serious?
Yes, Senator. We appreciate the opportunity to work with you in the committee on that issue.
I don't say this often, but I think the Trump administration has hit the nail on the head on the problem here. But Congress needs to codify these tools to ensure that contractors prioritize delivering on time and on budget, not just lining their own pockets. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, and I agree, Senator, with that sentiment. This concludes today's hearing. Questions of the record will be due within 2 business days of the conclusion. We're adjourned.
Thank you.